right, welcome everyone. My name's Alan MacLeod. I'm a senior staff writer here at Mint Press News and the podcast producer too. And I'm here hosting the latest edition of the MintCast podcast. Now, this show is made possible by supporters like you. As we face shadow banning on many platforms and the crackdown on independent anti-war journalism intensifies, we ask that you support us by becoming a member on our Patreon page, which we will link in the comments below. The MintCast podcast is also available on all your favorite podcast platforms, so please do subscribe. Now, today we're joined by a special guest, a prolific writer with over 50 years' experience in the field of human rights. He's the author of Building a Just World Order, Countering Mainstream Narratives, and his brand new book, just released recently, The Human Rights Industry. Here to talk about all things sanctions, human rights, and media, and building a better world is Alfred de Zayas. Welcome to you, Alfred.
Thank you, Alan, for inviting me, and let's use this opportunity to cover the world. There is so much to cover, whether the Ukraine war or tensions with China or the Belt and Road Initiative or sanctions, Cuba, Venezuela, etc. So shoot whatever you want to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of spot for choice with such a prestigious academic, lawyer, and UN official here. I could really talk to you about anything, but I guess most podcasts nowadays seem to start about talking about the Ukraine war. It's on everybody's minds right now. You've written extensively about it since it began. Could you give your opinion on the conflict from an international law perspective?
Well, first of all, this war, so that the listeners don't get shocked that I'm trying to be an apologist for Putin, this war is an aggression. This war entails the violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. As such, it is a crime. On the other hand, it has a prehistory. The war did not start in 2022 in February. It started in February 2014 with the illegal, unconstitutional coup d'etat against the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, something that the European states, the United States, as we know from Victoria Nuland, more or less co-financed, co-organized. Thus, there is a shared responsibility for the tragedy. I mean, my heart goes out to all the victims, whether Ukrainian, Russian, or anybody else who has been touched directly or indirectly by this war. And our priority has to be to end it as soon as possible. We need a ceasefire, we need negotiations, and there are good people out there with viable blueprints for peace. The International Progress Organization, there's a Nordic Initiative for Peace in Ukraine, there's of course the International Peace Bureau, there's the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, there is the proposal of the African presidents who have been invited to visit both Russia and Ukraine. So the name of the game is stop this slaughter and stop it today. President Lula of Brazil, President Lopez Obrador of Mexico have also offered their mediation. Pope Francis has offered his mediation. So there is hope. On the other hand, you can't mediate when one side unilaterally blocks mediation. We had a viable compromise in March 2022, negotiated by President Erdogan of Turkey. We had a viable peace plan organized by Prime Minister Bennett of Israel in April 2022. And both of these programs, both of these blueprints were actually sabotaged by the United States, my country of nationality. Now, the United States wants to prolong this war. The United States believes, I think wrongly, that it's going to so weaken the Russian Federation that there's going to be a color revolution in Russia, that Putin will be overthrown or killed or whatever, and then the United States can impose, the post-Putin world. I think that that is wishful thinking on the part of Joe Biden and the neocons. But let's go back to the crucial question of the legality. I said that Putin's special military operation in Ukraine was illegal. Why was it illegal? Because obviously the use of force is possible only with approval of the United Nations Security Council, or in the very limited circumstances of defense, self-defense. Self-defense is defined in Article 51 of the UN Charter. And as I always tell my students, the UN Charter is akin to a world constitution. Of course, we do not have enforcement mechanisms, but we do have a constitution, and the principal norm is the prohibition of the use of force. If you read Article 2, Paragraph 4, you see that it says the prohibition of the use of force or the threat of the use of force. Now, what has been happening over the last 30 years, notwithstanding the commitments made by George H.W. Bush, by James Baker, by any number of American politicians and diplomats in negotiations with the Soviets at the time, 1989, 1990, 1991, NATO was not to expand eastwards. And the quid pro quo was, of course, that the Warsaw Pact would be dismantled. The Warsaw Pact was dismantled, NATO was not. So here you have a breach of trust, a breach of word. Oral agreements made by foreign ministers, by presidents, are legally binding in international law. So the expansion of NATO constitutes a major violation of international law. But then in the category of a threat to international peace and security, that is also defined in Article 39 of the UN Charter. Now, what we have here is a brazen attempt by the United States and NATO to encircle Russia. And therefore, it's expansion of NATO toward Poland and Czechoslovakia, and the attempt in Ukraine, the attempt in Georgia. The year 2008 could have taught us a lesson, because when Saakashvili of Georgia tried to attack Southern Ossetia and killed the Russian peacekeepers in Southern Ossetia, obviously there was an immediate reaction from President Putin. And this aggression on the part of Georgia was stopped. So I thought that maybe we have learned something from it, meaning this is the red line and you're not supposed to go over the red line. Now, we're talking about a major provocation, and it is remarkable how all Western politicians, shall we say the collective West, whether it be Biden or Trudeau or Rishi or Scholz or Macron, they talk about an unprovoked war. Well, sorry. I mean, this war was very much provoked by NATO, and there were warnings for the last 20 years. I mean, if you reread Putin's statements at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, it's quite clear that the red lines were announced and repeated. Beyond that, you have an illegal overthrow of a democratically elected government in Kiev, which then threatened the security of Russia. There's no question that the new Putsch government in Kiev was militantly, viciously anti-Russian. And the fact that Russian felt threatened is understandable. And that does not justify, by the way, what George W. Bush referred to as preemptive self-defense back in 2003. This concept of preemptive self-defense was coined by the United States. That, of course, doesn't exist in international law. It is not envisaged in Article 51 of the UN Charter. Self-defense is possible only if there's been a pre-existing military attack. And even then, you're only supposed to respond proportionately and for a brief period of time, that period of time necessary until the Security Council becomes seized of the matter. So even though Russia's invasion of Ukraine was illegal, the provocation thereof was also illegal and also a violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Now, Article 2, Paragraph 3 of the Charter provides for settlement of disputes through peaceful means. Putin certainly invoked Article 2, Paragraph 3 and practiced Article 2, Paragraph 3 in all of his negotiations, in all of his peace overtures toward Ukraine since 2013, 2014. There was, of course, the Minsk agreement, which entailed shall we say, a temporary settlement of the problem of the Donbass, a temporary settlement through negotiation. Problem is, as we know from the reports of the special mission of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and there are reports up to the 22nd of February 2022, Ukraine violated the ceasefire and the Minsk agreements nonstop. So you had here, notwithstanding the goodwill shown on the part of Russia to settle this matter peacefully, there was a consistent pattern of violations of the Minsk peace agreements. You also had the signing of an order by Zelensky in January 2022 to retake the Donbass and Crimea by force of arms. Now, try to see that in the context of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice in the case of Kosovo, the advisory opinion of 2010. In that case, the declaration of independence of Kosovo was considered to be not in violation of international law. Therefore, the declaration of independence of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics must also be seen as not breaching international law. And it is inconceivable today that Serbia could reintegrate Kosovo into Serbia by the use of force, by waging war on the Albanians of Kosovo. By the same token, it is inconceivable that Ukraine could retake the territory of Donbass or of the Republic then now reincorporated into Russia of Crimea. Beyond that, one word that is missing in most of the discourse, and certainly in the mainstream media, you don't see it in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, BBC, self-determination. Notwithstanding all of the talk about self-determination for the Slovenes and the Croatians and the Bosnians and Herzegovina population, Montenegro, Kosovo, etc., they all are entitled to self-determination. Now, give me one good reason why the population, the people, and it is the people of Crimea, overwhelmingly Russian, or the people of Donbass should not have self-determination. In this case, it should be also remembered Russia had no intention of annexing the Donbass. When the leaders of Lugansk and Donetsk in 2014 wanted to hold a referendum, it was Putin who tried to persuade them not to, because he had enough headaches with Crimea, and he did not want to complicate matters. So the thrust of the Minsk agreements was not secession from Ukraine. It was not independence from Ukraine. It was internal self-determination. That means autonomy. What the Minsk agreements provided for was for direct negotiations between the leaders of Lugansk and Donetsk and the government in Kiev. And that would have guaranteed peace. Another aspect that would have guaranteed peace is one word from Ukraine: neutrality. The expansion of NATO into Ukraine was a casus belli. It threatened the security of Russia, and Russia, like every other country, has the right to its national security. That was the subject of the two treaties put on the table by Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, in December 2021. And I've read the two treaties. They are very solidly anchored on international law and the UN Charter. They're moderate, they're proportionate, and they would have provided a viable solution to the crisis. And what prevented that was the United States, essentially. The United States telling Zelensky to be intransigent, not to give in, to refuse to declare Ukraine neutral. That was a fatal error, because Russia has been warning for the last 20 years at least that this is a red line. I think we have to understand that provocation is at least as culpable, at least as criminal as the actual response to the provocation. Because the provocation is deliberate. You are trying to challenge the other party, whereas a response like the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, the response is ad hoc. I mean, once you've been threatened for years, sooner or later, you are going to have to answer this provocation. It's still illegal, but there are precedents. I published an article in Counterpunch called Precedents of Permissibility, and I listed all of the aggressions committed by NATO countries over the last 30 years. And all of these aggressions occurred in total impunity. The International Criminal Court was not engaged. The International Criminal Court did not condemn it. The General Assembly did not condemn it, etc. And this brings up another issue, the issue of double standards. One of the conclusions of my newest book, The Human Rights Industry, is that gradually the United Nations has been hijacked. Essentially, the United Nations has been serving the interests of Washington and Brussels. And that goes also for the agencies. Certainly the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, have been serving the interests of the collective West and have largely ignored the legitimate interests and aspirations of the global majority. When I'm speaking about the global majority, I'm speaking about the Latin Americans and the Africans and the Asians, which actually make up like 80% of the population of the world. I mean, we are actually quite a minority in the West, and we intend to keep our hegemony, our military and our economic hegemony over the rest of the world, which actually is a modified form of colonialism. We call it neo-colonialism. It is a form of imperialism. By forcing Russia into this situation, what the West has done is to accelerate the process of a multipolar world and actually a division of the world in, shall we say, the global majority and the West. It was a major miscalculation on the part of Washington and Brussels. And they evidently still don't know how to get out of the problem, although there are blueprints for peace that have been published over the last 16 months by a variety of personalities. Now, going back to aspects of international law, I think that the question of self-determination of the people of the Donbass is a classical matter to be sent up to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. The General Assembly can do that pursuant to Article 96 of the UN Charter. And in view of the advisory opinions that already exist concerning Western Sahara, concerning the wall having been built in Palestinian land, concerning Kosovo, etc., it's clear that the International Court of Justice cannot backpedal. And the International Court of Justice cannot create, shall we say, different standards for judging the rights of the people of the Donbass. Now, this is actually an objective, factual issue. As you may know, I was the representative of the Secretary General back in 1994 for the elections in Ukraine in March 94, the parliamentary elections in June 94, the presidential elections, and I pretty much crisscrossed the country and I know that the Germans, I beg your pardon, that the population of the Crimea is very largely Russian. Shall we say, a good 75% of the population of Crimea is Russian. And Crimea had basically no links, ethnic or linguistic or historical, with Ukraine. It was an artificial administrative decision on the part of Khrushchev to tear it out of the Russian oblast and to assign it to the Ukrainian oblast back in the 1950s. Now, that did make a difference for the self-determination of the Crimeans, because at that time everything was decided in Moscow anyway. Everything was Soviet Union. The problem started in 1991 when Ukraine unilateral split from the Soviet Union. By the way, they did not follow the procedure foreseen in the Soviet constitution. In any event, at that moment, the United Nations should have stepped in. At that moment, the United Nations should have said, look, we have different peoples in this territory. We want to know what they think. We want to know whether they want to belong to Ukraine or to Russia. And the United Nations could have held referenda in 1991. They certainly could have held referenda in 2014 after the illegal overthrow of the democratically elected government of Ukraine. There again, the United Nations failed the world, not only in not itself recognizing the danger and not itself organizing the referenda, but not even sending monitors, sending observers to the elections in Crimea and to the elections in the Donbass. They were invited. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe were also invited. European Union was invited to come and monitor. So it seems bad faith on the part of the UN and on the part of the West to say, oh, these referenda held in Crimea and in the Donbass have no validity. Well, I mean, you can't have it both ways. Either you go and you monitor or you shut up. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the UN, actually. I did have some other questions about Ukraine, but yeah, you spent a long time working for and with the UN, and I did want to get your opinion on it because obviously a lot of people have their gripes about it, but at the same time, it's probably the most representative global body we've got. As somebody who's involved with and constructing the framework for a better society, what would a more just world order look like? What would the UN look like in that situation? And I know also, just as a follow-up, you recently called for the United Nations to be moved out of New York and to a more neutral location. What do you mean by that?
Well, with regard to this last proposal, which I published in an article for Counterpunch, the United States has violated the headquarters agreement in so many occasions. Has violated the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and the Vienna Convention on relations between international organizations and states, that I think the time has come for United Nations headquarters to move to a more neutral territory where the headquarters agreement and the right of diplomats to enter the territory will be recognized. It is disgraceful how the United States has, shall we say, played games with the right of diplomats to participate in the activities of the United Nations. I recall not many years ago, when Yasser Arafat was still alive, that he had been invited to speak at the General Assembly in New York. Well, the United States refused to grant him a visa and could not enter the territory. And the response of the United Nations at the time, they used to have more guts than they do today, was to move the entire General Assembly to Geneva. So obviously, Yasser Arafat could come to Switzerland, and Switzerland was not going to violate its headquarters agreement. And I remember, because I was in the room, we have here the old Palais des Nations, the old League of Nations complex. And it has a huge General Assembly room, very Art Nouveau, very elegant. As the case may be, Yasser Arafat came. The entire audience, the delegates, stood up in honor of Arafat, and they also gave him a standing ovation. That, of course, is a major, shall we say, slap in the face against the United States for its arrogance and for its violation of the headquarters agreement. But of course, that didn't change anything for the Palestinians. I mean, we are here, we are, 30 years later, and the Palestinians are still being robbed of their lands and their water and their resources, and they're being bombed and killed, etc., in total impunity. Because that brings me also to a defense of the United Nations. Like I said, I am a great believer in the United Nations Charter. I'm a believer in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm a believer in the 9 core human rights treaties that have been adopted by the General Assembly and then have become, shall we say, the skeleton of the entire edifice of human rights protection. We need that. And if we didn't have the United Nations, we would have to create another one. The problem is the double standards, the hypocrisy, the lip service to human rights, the weaponization of human rights. I've written that for me, weaponizing human rights, instrumentalizing human rights for geopolitical reasons is akin to a sacrilege, is akin to blasphemy. Here you have really noble human values that are being used not to help human beings, but actually to destroy human dignity. The United States and the West, Brussels, misuses human rights for purposes of maintaining an unjust world order, a world order in which a minority rules over the global majority. Now, in my first book of the human rights trilogy that I published, that you already mentioned, Building a Just World Order, I published 25 principles of international order. Now, if those 25 principles of international order were observed, certainly we wouldn't have the tragedy in Ukraine today, nor would we have the tensions that have been artificially stoked against China. In the new book, the Human Rights Industry, I document the corruption of human rights, the corruption of language, the Orwellian cognitive dissonance that we are forced to endure in the Human Rights Council, in some of the expert bodies like the Human Rights Committee and Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. There is a discourse in some of these bodies that is actually anti-human rights. For me personally, it hurts. It's a very profound disappointment. When I was hired into the United Nations by Professor Theo van Boven, he was a then director of the Division of Human Rights. It was a different office. We were actually a small team. but we were a team of committed professionals who were really committed to the ideals of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. By now, it has become an industry, or as you might say, a business, because corporations, lobbies largely finance the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The office only gets about 1% of the overall United Nations budget. And I've always said the human rights program must be independent. The moment that you allow states to finance voluntarily, then the organization has become dependent and the organization can be blackmailed. There's no greater blackmailer in the world than the United States. The United States has been blackmailing the United Nations nonstop. Certainly for the last 30 years, it's rather disgraceful to watch how the United States buys votes, how the United States bullies small countries, threatens them with sanctions, etc. The United States wages war, a hybrid kind of war, in the United Nations Human Rights Council. And that is something that will surprise some of your listeners. It is a corruption of the system. But as you already said, I'm not belly aching. I'm not just giving you a fatal diagnosis. I'm also trying to work on the prognosis, and I have formulated very concrete, implementable, pragmatic solutions to the problems. And almost every chapter in the human rights industry ends with a series of proposals. And the problem, of course, is enormously complex because we are fighting an information war. If we don't win the information war, we're not going to be able to fix anything. The media has its narrative, and the narrative does not conform to the truth. And those who disagree with the narrative of the mainstream media are canceled. Those who expect a career in the United Nations or in the human rights system will be surprised that they will be canceled. I mean, I myself suffered any number of indignities. When I was a staff member, I certainly was passed up for political reasons in promotions. I did still reach the position of registrar, of the chief of the petitions department, which is an important activity. So I was satisfied with that. But I was subjected to mobbing on occasion. And that's one of the reasons I took early retirement to return to my previous activity, which was as professor, as an academic. And so I took a professorship at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I also was visiting professor in Chicago and in Trier and in Alcalá de Henares and in numerous other universities. And of course, here in Geneva, where I taught at the Haute Études Internationales, the graduate center of the University of Geneva. And now I teach at a private university, the Geneva School of Diplomacy. Now, I have remained very much loyal to the organization. I participate in every single session of the Human Rights Council. I represent several non-governmental organizations, independent non-governmental organizations like the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities, PEN International. I have been president of the Swiss pen for 7 years. I am now no longer president, but I am the delegate of the Swiss-French Pen Center in the Writers for Peace Committee. We just had our meeting last week, 3 days in Bled, Slovenia. We have a magnificent manifesto for peace. And there again, non-governmental organizations are a very mixed bag. There are many NGOs that are genuine and good, and for that reason, they don't get any money. And then there are large human rights organizations that are sold out to the hegemon, who get their money from corporations, from governments, and who do essentially the bidding of Washington and Brussels. That has to be corrected. But first of all, it has to be known. I mean, I tell many of my listeners, watch out giving money to Amnesty International or to Human Rights Watch, because you don't know what that money is going to be used for. Besides the astronomically high salaries of the directors and of Amnesty and of the Human Rights Watch and others organizations, you also have the golden handshakes. Few people know that when Irene Khan left Amnesty International, she got something like £560,000. And when her assistant left Amnesty International, she also got £300,000. Now imagine if you are a small donor and you have, saved your money and you've given $20 or you've given $50 to Amnesty International, only to learn that £560,000 have been given as a golden handshake. That does not improve the credibility of the organization. But as I say, the NGOs have betrayed human rights largely by applying double standards, whereas they love naming and shaming. They love accusing politicians, governments of violating human rights. They criticize some and they let all the others off the hook. And that is a form of lying. I mean, it's not just the fact that we're swimming actually in an ocean of lies, but we're also having to endure the suppression of alternative views, the suppression of really solid legal and historical analysis that we need in order to advance in human rights. And as I say, my disappointment with the organization is that it has happened and we've allowed it to happen. It's like the boiling slowly the frog until she's cooked. I mean, you don't throw the frog in the boiling water, but you just increase the temperature gradually. And then at the end of the day, you find that the organization has been hijacked, that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been hijacked.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why this slight sort of growing skepticism of the use of human rights and the language of it. We always see this in the Global South in particular. Some of my research found that, for instance, peak interest in human rights in Libya peaked on March 17, 2011, which was exactly the day that NATO launched its attack on Libya. Or human rights, interest in human rights in Syria peaked in 2017 when the United States again bombed the country. So I think a lot of people who perhaps don't really study this stuff too closely, but are just sort of in the milieu, start associating the language of human rights with actually bombing, to the point where people start thinking, if Westerners suddenly get interested in women's rights in your country, it's a good sign that you're going to get bombed.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I mean, yeah, one of the things I really liked about the human rights industry was just going through the actual record of the book. And in there, you're talking about how the United States talks about the rules-based international order a lot. But you also go on to list some of the most incredible resolutions the US has recently voted against, like the Cuba blockade, voting against condemning Nazism, against the censure of the Israeli nuclear program, all sorts of these sorts of key issues that we don't really hear about in the media. So yeah, I mean, I guess one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, as we don't have too much time to go, is the use of sanctions, which under international law, it's pretty clear when and when you can't use them, right? But the United States has imposed sanctions on something like a quarter of the world's population. Now, as an academic and a UN official, you've actually seen the impact of sanctions up close. Could you tell us what these things are? Are they highly, highly penetrative, very precise mechanisms of coercion, or are they much more broad and affect a much wider population?
I object to the use of the word sanctions. Sanctions can be imposed exclusively by the United Nations Security Council under Article 41 of the Charter. Everything else is unilateral coercive measures. Now, unilateral coercive measures are ab initio illegal. They violate the principle of sovereign equality of states. They entail interference in the internal affairs of states. They sabotage freedom of commerce and freedom of navigation. This is laid down in not only in the United Nations Charter, but in the Friendly Relations Resolution of 1970, Resolution 2625 of the General Assembly. It is in the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action of 1993. It is in countless resolutions. And every year, the General Assembly adopts a resolution condemning unilateral coercive measures. And the last resolution was adopted 15 December 2022, so 5 months ago, by an overwhelming vote, and res ipsa loquitur, the facts speak for themselves, who voted against the resolution. Obviously, the United States and Europe and its allies and those countries that they managed to bully into voting against it. The UN Human Rights Council does it every year. The last one was just adopted in March this year, on the 3rd of April. That's Resolution 52/13, adopted this year by the Human Rights Council, again with the negative votes of the collective West. It still went through by more than 2/3 of the membership of the Human Rights Council. There have been 30 resolutions by the General Assembly against the embargo of Cuba by the United States, essentially ordering the United States to lift the sanctions and ordering other states not to observe the American UCMs, and in total impunity, because the United States simply doesn't care. The United States is used to its culture of impunity. Going back to the term unilateral coercive measures, it's important not to use the term sanctions, because sanctions implies that the country that's imposing sanctions somehow has the legal or the moral authority to impose sanctions. because that presupposes that the targeted country has somehow violated international law, violated norms, or is somehow guilty of something. And the same with the concept of overcompliance with sanctions regimes. I never use the word compliance because that somehow implies that the unilateral coercive measures have legitimacy and you should comply with them. So we have here a linguistic problem, a semantic problem, but also psychological. There's no accident. It's not an accident that we use these terms because we want already to prejudge the situation.
Yeah.
What must be understood is that sanctions kill. Sanctions are hybrid warfare. Sanctions are non-conventional warfare, and they kill just as much as a hot war. The siege of Leningrad by the Nazis, 1941 to 1944, was in a way a total encirclement and embargo of Leningrad, so that no food could come in, no victuals, no water, no medicines, etc., etc. It is estimated that anywhere between 700,000 and 1 million Russians died as a result of the Nazi siege of Leningrad. But how about the siege of Cuba, of Nicaragua, of Venezuela, of Iran, etc.? When I was independent expert on international audit, I specifically requested UNICEF and UNHCR and WHO and ILO and the FAO to quantify the harm caused by unilateral coercive measures. Obvious that if you are diabetic and you don't get your insulin because of the unilateral coercive measures, you die. Even if you don't get it, maybe you get it, but you get it late, you still die. Same thing if you are an HIV positive person who needs antiretroviral drugs, you don't get it in time, you're dead. And when I was in Venezuela, I had the opportunity of speaking with more than 40 NGOs and with professors and students, and obviously with the opposition, with members of the National Assembly, et cetera, et cetera. And it was quite clear to me that the population, the Venezuelan people, did not blame Maduro for their suffering. They blamed the United States. They were intelligent enough to grasp the reality that asphyxiating the economy of Venezuela had as consequences, of course, unemployment and the lack of medicines and food items, et cetera, all directly related to the U.S. Unilateral coercive measures, financial blockade, et cetera, killed people. Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University published a study under the title Collective Punishment. That was back in 2019. And he estimated, together with another economist, Mark Weisbrot of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C., they estimated that for the year 2018 alone, 40,000 Venezuelans had lost their lives as a direct consequence of these sanctions. Now, 2019 was a much worse year than 2018, and 2020, 2021, 2022. Now, this massacre of human beings, infants who die young because they don't have milk, they don't have the nutrients, etc. Elderly people who die untimely because of the lack of everything. Persons who are dependent on dialysis. It suffices that one piece in the dialysis machine is broken, you can't get the piece. You cannot buy it. All of these things are under the sanctions regimes. So the result is that people die and continue to die. And the cynicism of American politicians who try to justify this in the name of human rights. We are justifying murder in the name of human rights. It is quite shocking. So that I have proposed to elevate the issue of unilateral coercive measures as a crime against humanity for purposes of Article 7 of the Statute of Rome. This is something that both the International Court of Justice could entertain, and of course, the International Criminal Court. But there again, and you've read it in the book, there's a chapter on the International Criminal Court. It's a total disgrace. It's a total farce. It's a scam. To pretend, as the current prosecutor at the ICC, the British barrister Karim Khan, I assume he's of Indian descent. I don't know. In any event, I don't know him personally. One of the first things he did after he was named prosecutor was to discontinue the investigations into war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by NATO forces in Afghanistan. But he continued the investigations concerning war crimes and crimes against humanity by the Taliban. So here, the double standards are absolutely breathtaking. And now the warrant for the arrest of Vladimir Putin. No question that here the crime of aggression has been committed. And certainly Russian troops have committed crimes in Ukraine. But you cannot prosecute one side and let the other side scot-free. If you're going to indict a head of state, a serving head of state, well, you would have to indict Joe Biden. You would have to indict Blinken for the use of drones against civilians. Certainly, the Afghanistan overuse of drones and the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians who were killed in Afghanistan by American weapons. I mean, that constitutes violations of Article 6, 7, and 8 of the Statute of Rome. And to pretend you can only indict Putin, but not Biden, or not Scholz, or not Macron, or everybody who is engaged in aggressive actions against other countries, or who are delivering weapons that are going to be used to kill civilians, because the civilians in the Donbass have been killed by American weapons, have been killed by French weapons, have been killed by British weapons. So it is inconceivable that anybody would still have any respect for the institution of the International Criminal Court. I think it has been so misused. I mean, hitherto it's been a racist organization up to the indictment of Putin. The only persons indicted have been Africans. You ask yourself, why was not Tony Blair indicted for the aggression against Iraq in 2003, for all the massive war crimes and crimes against humanity committed against the Iraqi people? I mean, there's so many candidates to be indicted. I mean, certainly Mohammed bin Salem of Saudi Arabia for the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Yemen. Certainly Netanyahu for all the crimes committed against the Palestinians, all the crimes committed against Syria. I mean, it's unbelievable how these acts of war are taking place constantly against Syria. I mean, all of these drones, all of these missiles that Israel sends against Damascus and Aleppo and other towns, and all the civilians who have been killed by Israel, and Netanyahu has not been indicted. But part of the complicity here is with the media. The media whitewashes it. The media plays apologetics for the West and only engages in naming and shaming against Putin and China. Now, that also violates Article 20 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 20 prohibits incitement to hatred, incitement to racial hatred, incitement to violence, the kind of cheap propaganda that the New York Times and Washington Post and CNN perpetrate on a daily basis against Russians and against Chinese, to the point also that cancel culture has been incorporated into the arsenal of Russophobia. And then you have people like Alan MacLeod or Valery Gergiev canceled. I mean, these are famous and enormously talented artists who are then punished for being Russian. It's absolutely inconceivable, but that is whitewashed in the Western media, so that there's a certain degree of acceptance. I mean, that's the way things are. You know, the Russian, they should have spoken against Putin. Well, this kind of double standards, and then I go to another case I just mentioned, Syria, another organization that has lost all of its authority and all of its credibility, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. We all want to see chemical weapons destroyed. The Syrians destroyed theirs in 2013. And then you have these absolutely absurd false flags and these absurd staged things in Duma and elsewhere. And that, again, detracts from the credibility of this organization. The first president of the organization, Jose Bustani, has called for investigation of the tampering of the evidence, of the destruction of evidence, etc. And what has happened? The mainstream media has actually defamed him, defamed the whistleblowers, and that allows me to come back to the issue of whistleblowers. I dedicated my book to whistleblowers, and I listed about 30 of them. Well, certainly, if the media had any respect for human rights and for freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, freedom of journalism, they would be defending all the journalists and all the whistleblowers who actually are, in a very real sense, human rights defenders. because democracy depends on a free media. Democracy depends on access to all information. And if we are deprived of the information, and we are, then our rights are being violated. And who is defending our rights? Those whistleblowers who tell us what crimes are being committed in our name. Because all I can say for all the atrocities committed in Vietnam and in Iraq and in Libya and in Syria by the United States, by Israel, by United Kingdom, by France, and Germany, and all countries who participated in these illegal actions. I want to stand up and say, not in my name. It is a disgrace that someone like Chelsea Manning was convicted to something like 30 years when he's been released, but in any event, he's been harassed to such a degree. And take Julian Assange. Julian Assange is not even the whistleblower. He's the journalist who's made that information available. And that is a function of a journalist to make information available to people. And for that, he's been locked up now since 2012. I mean, this is absolutely unacceptable. And the responsibility goes with the four governments, United States, United Kingdom, Sweden, and Ecuador, where the rule of law has collapsed. There's been a breakdown of the rule of law, as very well documented by my colleague and friend, Professor Niels Meltzer. He was the special rapporteur of the United Nations on torture. And because Assange had been subjected to sleep deprivation and to all sorts of psychological torture methods, he went to visit Assange in Belmarsh prison in London. And he published a brilliant book called The Trial of Julian Assange, published 2022, Verso Books, New York. I can highly recommend that book because it is worse than the Dreyfus affair. Niels Meltzer is the Emile Zola of the 21st century. I mean, the Dreyfus affair, that was a grotesque miscarriage of justice by military courts in France. And it required a courageous journalist like Emile Zola, with his brilliant article, J'accuse, to bring it out in the open. Now, Niels Meltzer has written not an article, but he's written a whole book documenting this breakdown of the rule of law in the US, UK, Sweden, and Ecuador. And what is the follow-up? None. Julian Assange is still in Belmarsh prison, and the media continues to be complicit in this crime.
Yeah, and when people do start to speak out, or journalists or media outlets, we get shadow banned, we get sidetracked, delisted, deranked, and sometimes even deleted. So if anyone's watching,
you land on a kill list.
Yeah, that's true as well. So yes, if you are watching this,
made the kill list, by the way.
Sorry,
Jeffrey Sachs.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
I haven't made it yet.
Okay. Well,
so I
that's good to hear.
had the honor yet to be included in that very select group of people. But well, I think we've spoken.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. So absolutely. If you do like what you hear, please do support us on Patreon. This has been another edition of the MintCast. I've been speaking with lawyer, professor, academic, and UN official Alfred de Zayas. Alfred de Zayas, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Hopefully we'll speak again someday.
Hope so.
Cheers.